Hi, everybody. My name is Maya. I work for the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center, and I want to welcome you to the first of the 2024 Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center webinars. Similarly to the last year, 2023, we will be having these webinars on the third Friday of every month from 12 to 1 p.m. They are free to attend, and they are all online. They are all recorded and they are all posted to the MAIC webinar page that is on our website. So that's just a little bit of logistics about that. Before we get started with our lovely presenters today, who will be talking about their visit to Alaska and kelp farming in Alaska, I just want to give a shout out to the NACE presenters, organizers, participants, all of the above. NACE happened last week, and it was very fun, big success, and we're very proud of everyone who was there and very grateful to everybody who was able to help us. Additionally, coming in February, I wanted to mention that on the 16th, that will be our next webinar. So that's again Friday the 16th, and it will be about legal considerations for aquaculture, and the presenters will be from Eaton Peabody. And finally, before we get started, we have two grant opportunities which are open to farmers right now. So these are farmer funding opportunities. The requests for applications are on the MAIC website. If you go to our webpage, there is a resources tab, and underneath it, there is farmer funding opportunities. So you should be able to find it there. And the two opportunities are first, the farmer to farmer exchange, which this presentation is actually an example of the farmer to farmer exchange program. And the second one is a new grant funding opportunity this year, and it is the community engagement grants. And it's a very exciting opportunity for farmers to reach out to their local communities and get some financial support in doing that. So I highly recommend you check that out. It's for Maine farmers. Both of these opportunities are for people doing aquaculture in Maine. So definitely give those a look. And without any further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to our lovely presenters. Today we have Kristen Isfeld and David Leith. David is a kelp farmer from Yarmouth, and he will be presenting on the trip that he and Kristen took to Alaska to learn about seaweed. So take it away, David.
Thank you, Maya. Let's see here, share screen. Bear with me, folks. This is the first time doing this. Is everybody there with me?
Yep, we've
Okay,
got
so
you.
this is my Alaska aquaculture adventure, a farmer's perspective. Sorry, wrong button. Well, how did I get here? Well, I have to thank my friend Stuart Hunt for inviting me, and I think he took over Green Marine's mooring company and renamed it Casco Bay Mooring in about 2017. And one day we were hanging out in his garage. He said, "Hey, would you want to come work with me and grow kelp?" I'm like, "That sounds like fun." So in the summer of 2017, we started learning about kelp, and he had gotten the 4 LPAs. We started growing kelp. That first season was 18-19. We got in that cohort of the shared waters class, where we met a bunch of other great people, including Chris at MAIC and Annie and a whole bunch of great instructors. But in that class was also Ken Sparta and Spartan Sea Farms, and Thomas Henninger of Madeline Point Oysters. And these guys all happen to live in Freeport and Yarmouth, where Stuart and I live. And one thing led to another, and we decided to try and start a co-op. And so we started what is now known as Maine Family Sea Farm Cooperative. I think that started the chatter around 2019. 2020. In the meantime, we're working out of Green Marine down on the Cousins River, down behind the Muddy Rudder off Route 1 that you pass every day when you're going down 295. And there was another guy there, Chad Strader, who ran he did a lot of work on the water doing piers and dock work. And at the time, the Lowell brothers were selling that property, and Chad and his brother-in-law and a few other people, with help from CEI and a whole slew of people, helped them secure a loan to buy what is now known as Sea Meadows Marine Foundation, which is a nonprofit to protect the working waterfront. And that's where the co-op is located. And we have monthly meetings. Let's see, I guess 2023 January co-op meeting. Ken announced that he had, or I think it was after the meeting, he told me he got this MAIC grant. Would I want to go to Alaska? And of course I said yes, because I've always dreamed of going Alaska. And it just sounded wonderful. So we started to make plans. It was going to be Greg Foote, who is Dirigo Marine Services, Little Buster's Oysters, Kristen, is Latitude 43, Oyster and Kelp Farm down in Cumberland, and Ken Sparta, Spartan Sea Farms, and myself as a representative of Casco Bay Mooring and Kelp, now Casco Bay Sea Farms. So we were planning to go in March, and we were talking to the guys in Kodiak that we wanted to visit, and some people in Homer, and we were going to go to Cordova. And then in the I wasn't even part of this conversation, but Ken was talking to those folks, and they said there's going to be a huge farmers forum sponsored by Green Wave in April. So we kind of switched course, and we figured we could meet a lot more farmers, because there were going to be farmers from all over the states and British Columbia and up and down the coast of Alaska. And we could get more bang for our buck going straight to Kodiak, going to this farmers forum, and then trying to get to a few other places after that. As luck would have it, I'm standing at my door on April 2nd, I believe, waiting to get picked up to go to the airport, and all flights to Alaska were canceled. There was a volcano in Siberia, and we were stuck. So we didn't go on April. That being said, by the time we were able to go in early June, our slew of participants had changed. It was going to be Ken, Stuart, myself, and Kristen. And then again, at the last minute, Ken had a family emergency. He couldn't leave. We had just finished harvesting our kelp, and Stuart's son was around. So at the last minute, he out of pocket bought Henry a ticket, kind of as a reward for all the work he'd done on our farm. So here we go. We're on our way to Alaska. And where did we go when we got there? Well, we flew into Anchorage, of course, and we went directly to Kodiak. We also visited Seward and Homer, both on the Kenai Peninsula. When we talked about our objectives, both Ken and I had heard about the Catary System back at it was a seaweed symposium just before the shutdown in 2020. We were in Providence, and there was a lot of talk about this new system to maximize the amount of kelp you can grow in an area. So that was on our list. We'd also heard about the harvest innovations that these guys were making in Kodiak, supported by the ARPA. And so, as always, we just wanted to be open and curious, share what we knew, participate in this summit, and then head on to Seward and Homer, where we had planned some visits at a fish hatchery and with some other farmers. So we get to Alaska, and of course, we're going to Kodiak. We're hoping to see the bear. This bear was in the lobby of my hotel. But the first morning, Kristen and I go to get a coffee, and we have bear spray available to borrow. And we were like, okay, we're in Alaska. And it's real. There have been sightings in and around town last summer. This page is just a bit of flavor of what you're going to see. My favorite is in the upper right-hand corner, the cow sign with bullet holes and the aliens above. I mean, it's kind of the flavor. There's really fun people out there. So this summit was sponsored by Green Wave. Originally, I think there were over 25 farmers that were supposed to be there. I failed to mention that both Stuart and his son got stuck in the Newark airport. They were on a different itinerary, so they didn't arrive till Sunday night, I think. So we got in Saturday. Matt Moretti from Bangs Island Mussels, he was also stuck. So we think we had 13 participants from up and down the coast of Alaska, BC, and up and down the coast of Maine and New England. So we had it was just chock-a-block. I mean, I can't even begin to cover everything that we covered, but we talked about harvest methods, standards, buyers, farmer, market development, buyer experience, price making versus price taking. There was a co-op, two speakers, well, three speakers if we include our co-op, but we had a speaker, Travis, from Organic Valley, which is one of the largest dairy cooperatives, and another gentleman from, well, I'll speak on that later, but at the end of the weekend, we were, brainstorming. I have to say it was really, really informative, and I hope that I'll be able to share more of that with you. So the first thing we talked about were harvest methods, and as I flip through these slides pretty quickly, I just want you to try and notice some similarities. And starting with New England, this is our harvest barge. This is our 5th season, and we make slight improvements every year. That slide was added a year ago. It's a vinyl slide. We haul with a hauler, a pot hauler, and we cut into 3 bags and then strip the line into its own bag with holdfasts. This is the Putam Farm, and Mrs. Putnam was the only person who got to Kodiak for the original meeting, so she probably had the best farmer meeting of anybody because she was there for 3 or 4 days by herself getting a full tour of Kodiak. This is Ocean's Balance. We had Dave Labby, who's their production person, was present. So Ocean's Balance is a company in Saco who makes kelp products, but they also grow their own product and buy from other farmers in Casco Bay and around the state. Bangs Island Mussels, they harvest with 2 lines. I think their max they've done in a day is 14,000 pounds. And they're busy when they're not doing mussels, they're busy growing kelp for Atlantic Sea Farms. This is Title IX Fisheries out of North Haven. A shout out to them. And maybe people saw that they saved the Browns boatyard during the big storm last week. This is Karen. Her dad is Foy Brown, and that's them on the front. The roller is something you're going to see in a lot of these pictures because everybody's been modifying. Susie and Jay down at Stonington Kelp Company, they harvest for direct sale and they process their own. So they're harvesting by hand, not for volume, but for daily deliveries, or they do volume when they're doing their own processing. This Thimble Island, which is Brent Smith's farm. Again, it's a lot of small, it's a smaller, they have many species, so it's a bit smaller. Violet Cove Oysters is Susan Wick, and another shout out to her. She's just landed the first commercial kelp farming license in the state of New York, and she'll be selling this season to, I think she's hoping for restaurants in and around the New York City area. So she's growing in shallow water, as you can see, and she's hand harvesting. But on the slide on the right, you can see she does have a ramp, which seems to be a common thing for a lot of the farms. The British Columbia and Alaska, I have pictures from the farms in British Columbia. These farmers didn't make it, only one of these pictures, I think. But again, notice the ramps. There's a worker from this farm, Tom, who's opening his own hatchery, Kelp Hatchery. And he said a big part of this is they have a large farm, large crew. They have a smaller boat going out cutting lines and hauling them to these ramps. They wash down everything on the ramp. They're trying to automate that, but it's quite expensive with the large crew and many boats. This is Sequester Farm from Juneau. This is a newer farm. You see the small skip they're harvesting into. This is Johnny Anthony. We call him Johnny Longarms. He's a very energetic guy. They've been working with Barnacle Seafood, both as a growing kelp for sale, but Barnacle's been, I think, because they couldn't pay them as much as they wanted, they were helping by giving them shared space or helping with their product development. This is one of the farms we wanted to see. We didn't get to visit, and they were not present at the meeting. But and these guys are Kodiak. This is Nick Mangini's farm in Kodiak, and he's one of the developers of the harvest vessel that you see here. And it's it takes a lot of the things, you see a reel here, you see a ramp, but the way they put it together is quite different. And I'm going to go into some of the development over the past few years since we first heard about this project back in 2019. Alf is on the left here and Nick on the right. Alf presented to us, and I've kind of made it a bridge version of what he talked about. Their funding came from this ARPA-E project, which was established in 2019, whose goal is scalable microalgae for farming for biofuel. So they're trying to grow as much as you can and harvest as quickly as possible. One of their problems with this whole development is they had to harvest for food grade because that's who they're able to sell to. Those are their buyers at the moment, but they're trying to incorporate this research into what they're doing on the day-to-day, because as we know, we get one shot a year to grow a crop of kelp. So they're doing a lot of research and development as they're trying to grow for a buyer. Also, they worked on the catenary array system, which is engineered by Cliff Gowdy, which maximizes the number of lines you can grow in an area. And as I said, this has been implemented by Nick Mangini here on the right and Alf Pryor, both Kodiak farmers and fishermen when they're not farming kelp. But I think both would like to do kelp full time, and it's just one of those things that's tough for any of us to do. The Harvest Buddy is this machine in the middle, and I'll show you some of the iterations. So this is a layout from Cliff's original drawings of the array system in 2019. As you can see, there's 5 seated lines with bars here on the left, and then the single lines closely grown together. And this is all allowed with these curved lines all at tension, and with only spar buoys here on the corners for flotation. So the idea is that the tension is going to keep the lines close to the surface, and obviously the purpose to maximize the amount of lines we can have in a given area. So the idealized, everything on the left there, many lines, few anchors. But the reality that these guys discovered after our first season is the tension is not enough. Some of the lines sunk to as deep as 45 feet. The 5-line spreaders were difficult to work with. The links connections, which I think we all find is a problem, especially when there's a lot of growth on the line. And with the heavy winds and weather they flipped 700-pound claw anchors right out of the bottom. So they had to rethink what was happening. They were also part of this plan. There was funding for both small vessel and large vessel. In this slideshow, I'm only showing the small vessel just because for lack of time, but they were trying to harvest those 5-line arrays on a larger fishing boat, and they ran into some problems with that as well. And with COVID happening, like literally right after that seaweed symposium in Portland a few years ago, I think we were lucky that we do the work we do because we could continue doing it. So they had to solve, they wanted to increase the capacity for a small vessel. And this is the small vessel design that Alf came up with. They repurposed the 24-foot aluminum. They had a hopper on the side. They'd fill the bag and they'd drop the brailer bag. They have floating bags that they use for the fish industry, and they popped it out the side and would have a tender come pick it up. This is a shot of the catenary system from the air. And this year they increased the growth lines to 400 feet. They added spanner bars for flotation. And they had the dead-eye tensioner, which I show in the picture in the lower, in the lower right. But the problems, again, there's always problems. Mid-span spreader bars cause problems. Kelp came to the surface during storms, tangled and frayed grow lines. Tensioners work once, then they jam. So detensioning, when you want to take the thing apart, is, you're just cutting lines. So they work to tighten it down, but they weren't that easy to work with. So they wanted to figure out a way to harvest more quickly and save deck space. They continue with the floating bag idea, and you see on the lower left, that slot in the front is where they would hang the bag. So instead of, as every other picture you've seen, we're trying to get the mass out of the water and then cut it into bags. They're cutting almost at water height. So it saves a lot of energy, whether it's our own physical energy or power. They built it on a skid so the whole rack could be taken off the barge. They had cores for the rope, but again, there were problems. The kelp is stripping because, as you can see, the angle, if you kind of remember those other shots of everyone's trying to get the pick point up higher. So we noticed that on our barge, that the higher you could get the kelp at a better angle, it's not going to strip. And if it starts stripping, as we all know, it's really difficult to get it up and over and onto the boat. They had, their holdfast stripper was built out of cheap materials. The hedge trimmer that they were using wasn't big enough. It's just everything we do, it looks good on paper, and then once we get going, it's got to be changed. So they had a different name for the Harvest Buddy 1.0, but I won't say it here. But so the Harvest Buddy is a little more friendly, and that's the machine that we got to see and witness in operation. So they simplified the design, increased the height of the pick point, as I mentioned, increased the angle of the chute because the kelp wasn't sliding on the flatter chute. It's funny how sticky kelp can be even on a metal surface. They added a larger diameter roller, a spinning blade cutter, which is really kind of intimidating to see. I know Alf was talking about using like a weed whacker twine, and then they wouldn't have to worry about, with your hasp, you're worrying about metal shavings or something falling into the kelp. But with a plastic, it would be less of a concern for the food grade. And they also, instead of trying to harvest 2 lines at a time, they simplified. And again, that's what Nick said, and he was working on the large vessel. Rather than trying to pull 5 lines out, they just changed and focused on simplifying and do 1 line at a time. The catenaries were effective. The distance between the lines. Lexi Meyer, who happens to be Alf's wife, is a PhD student at the University of Alaska in Anchorage, I believe, living and working in Kodiak. She did a line spacing study for one of her PhD projects. So you see the photos at the bottom. That's at 1 feet. There was, for some reason, we don't have the 2 feet represented. 3 feet, 4 feet, and 6 feet. And the distance between lines, optimally, it was about 4 feet, believe it or not. So they are packing them in. And this is something that I think, well, I don't believe, because you can see the way the catenary is set up with the anchoring outside the area of the farm. Most of the farms in the East Coast, at least every farm that I've worked on and helped build, we build them long and narrow. And it's just got me rethinking how I would build a farm. And it's, I haven't run all the numbers, but I think you can grow, a rough estimate, maybe 3 times the amount of kelp in a 4-acre farm with a catenary system. But I believe where we are with limited space, it would have to be modified. But that's to be determined as we try and play with some of these ideas that we brought back. So one of the things that they said, which which I think we all take to heart, is having a harvest strategy for how we're going to harvest is really important. It saves a lot of problems down the line if you have a good game plan. So these are shots from the field trip that we took to the farm. And I'm just going to leave this one up and talk a little bit about what things we covered at the Farmers Forum. Sorry, my notes are a lot of whack here. We talked a lot about standards, both the buyer standards and the farmer standards. And when you think about the value chain, what can we control as farmers? We know what good kelp is. We know how to grow kelp, and where do we get the money? If we just grow it and sell it at the dock, which is totally understandable because it's a lot of work and a lot of guys have other species to go work on, because many guys have multiple, they're not just kelp growers, they're kelp growers and lobstermen, or they're kelp growers and mussel farmers, or kelp growers and scallop farmers. So they have a fisherman mentality. They want to cut and deliver at the dock and get paid and move on to the next thing. But there's something to be said for stabilizing your product. And if you have a shelf stable product, you can get more money. So that's one way you can increase the value of your product, by taking the first step in processing. But again, that's a bottleneck because there's not enough processors. There are not enough small scale processors. The processors that exist want to buy at volume. They don't want to buy from a small farm. So there was a lot of discussion around this. There's no real answers. There's just challenges. One of the solutions is a cooperative. We started our cooperative essentially as a shellfish cooperative, but then we found that from 2 or 3 kelp farmers and people saying they didn't want to grow kelp, all of a sudden we have, I believe, 7 kelp farmers out of 12 shellfish farmers in our cooperative. And we're trying to figure out how we can maximize incomes. The guys in Alaska are very interested. There's a lot of co-ops in Alaska, both for, the power company is a co-op. There's fishermen co-ops. So while we don't have answers, we have a lot of ideas. We realize that almost every kelp farmer is growing and selling at wholesale, and the processors and the vendors who are profiting. So that became a concern for people. How do we bridge that gap? I mean, we know in the value chain, there's 3 major points of value. I mean, there's value all along, but so we have nurseries and farming. Farming is the higher value out of those 2. Then we go to processing, stabilization, which would be, harvest and then processing. So our farmers are getting their seed from somewhere, they're farming it, they're harvesting it, delivering it. The processors are drying it or freezing it, and then moving on to value-added product and then getting it to market. So if we can figure the best ways to stabilize the kelp, then we can work on making more money. I mean, it's not ideal to be in the situation that we're in, because it's business as usual, and we know that business as usual will lead us to the same place that we've always gone. Kelp is such a nascent industry. When we talked with Travis of Organic Valley, we realized that he's talking about dairy industry. They started their dairy co-op with 7 members 35 years ago. Now they have over 2,000 members. So when you think, you change milk to kelp, that sounds like a good game plan. But then when you really talk it through, you realize people have been farming dairy for thousands of years. So it's a known product that the consumer wants. Our biggest issue with kelp as farmers is people don't know what it is. It's not part of our culture. While people have been eating it and some people have been cultivating it for a very long time. In the United States, it's not part of our culture. So we have an opportunity, yes, but we also have the challenge of educating our public and letting people know why it's good for you, why it's good for the environment, how it can be used. I mean, the potential for growth is great. Everyone knows how to grow it, but the biggest question I think of the whole weekend was, how do we get more money for it? The guys in Kodiak they've been getting buyers, but then they have buyers who say they don't want the product. They still get paid, but like last year, Nick, I think he said he was estimating 200,000 pounds of kelp that he has to get out of the water, and he has nowhere to go with it. So we had conversations around, best scenario with your buyer and worst scenario. We had scenarios of buyers rejecting kelp after they started processing it. We had people having buyers who, like, it's great if you have a buyer who's going to pay even if they don't need it, but then you have the problem of having to physically remove it from the site and having no place for it to go. So I think, pardon me. So knowing the standards of your buyer is very important. The protocols, having a say in the system is very important for the farmers. Sorry. The farmers need to lead by example. We have a responsibility to our buyers, and our farmer-to-farmer relationships are key. It's a long road, but an exciting one, and business as usual leads to the usual outcomes. So again, this is an opportunity, and with sharing equipment, marketing, and banding together, we have an opportunity to do something new. After Kodiak, we headed down to Seward on the Kenai Peninsula, where we met with Jeff Hetrick and Michael Mahmood at the Altic Pride Marine Institute. This is it's more than just a hatchery. They grow oysters, geoducks, clams, little neck clams, cockles, abalone, red king crab, blue king crab, rock scallops, sea cucumbers, and kelp. Founded originally by the Kodiak native tribe as the Altic Pride Shellfish Hatchery. This became part of the Chugach Regional Resource Commission. The CRRC is an intertribal consortium of 7 Alaskan native villages. All these villages are on the Prince William Sound and the lower Cook Inlet region. These tribes represented are the Titilic Village IRA Council, the Chenaga IRA Council, the Port Graham Village Council, the Nanwalek IRA Council, the Native Village of Ayak in Cordova, the Kodiak Native Tribe, and the Valdez Native Tribe. Pardon me for any mispronunciation. The CRRC's primary mission is to develop the natural resource capability and capacity for each member tribe. The APMI has greatly expanded its research projects under CRRC's natural resource funding, from shellfish production, lab enhancements, which have allowed harmful algae bloom monitors, PSP testing, and ocean acidification research, all of which benefit the general public. As you can see, this next slide, it's a lot of what's represented, but they're now also growing kelp. Michael who's giving us the tour, walked us through not only what they're doing in-house, but they had just shipped out a portable kelp in a Conex that was built in a 20-foot Conex container. And he mentioned the women of Mothers of Millions, which is a two women-owned company that built another portable container kelp farm. Oops, got off track here. Sorry. The water quality monitoring and analysis for Resurrection Bay and Chagres region. This is directly linked right to the bay, but they do sampling from all around the state. And as I say, Michael had mentioned the Conex container. These two Conex containers were also going to one of the villages. We had just missed the, I think due to the rescheduling of our trip, we kind of missed a few connections. So the Conex container had just left a week or so before we got there. And me being me, I wanted to go across and get some pictures. Everybody else was ready to leave after our tour. And I walked over to these Conex containers, and the guy here on the right with me, Joe Togus, is he's a marine engineer. He had built this, it's an abattoir, a kitchen for the tribal people, and it's going to be shipped down to one of the villages. And they also have a hydroponics for growing vegetables. So I went over to take a picture of it. I started chatting with him, and I said, I'm a kelp farmer. And he's like, well, I'm starting a kelp farm off Fox Island, which is the yellow dot there on the map of Resurrection Bay. The green dot is where we were at the hatchery in Seward. And we had gone on the glacier tour up in the Altic Bay. So we had gone past his farm, knew what he was talking about, started talking kelp, and he had seen or read about the direct seed line, and he's trying to build this system so that he can directly seed to his farm. As I said, Michael had mentioned the Mothers of Millions project, which was it's another company started by two women, Brianna and Christine. And these are pictures from their website or their Instagram. Brianna and Christine have put a Conex on this frigate. So it's a floating kelp farm. They're the fourth licensed commercial kelp farm in the state, and they started growing kelp in 2020. And I looked her up. I talked to Brianna the other day, and she was telling me that it's a lot easier to grow the seed than it is to farm the kelp. It's taken them 3 years to get their license. And they are growing down in Pony Cove, which is the pink dot down at the bottom of the map there on the left. And they had a lot of pushback. They wanted to be further up towards Seward, like a 20-25 minute boat ride. And it's hard to believe, because when you go down the bay, you see no civilization, and the recreational people and the tourist companies did not want to see a farm in that area. And just talking to her, she said what's frustrating with the farming is they're steaming three hours in these very short windows of daylight to go work on the farm. And in Alaska, the weather can change on a dime. So they're leaving at 5 a.m. They're steaming 3 hours down the bay. She said her idealism is waning a little bit. I told her to keep her chin up because every year is different. It's I think what's great about these exchanges is you hear so many similar things. I mean, last year when I got this opportunity to go, I was so excited. Our kelp was growing, everything was looking great, and we had a really low yield. And by the time I was ready to go, I didn't want to go to Alaska and talk about kelp. I didn't want to talk about kelp at all. But it turned out to be a really inspiring trip. So just I have to say, meeting Joe was just such a surprise, and it's just because I had to go over there and take a picture of that Connex. And talking to Brianna, she said he didn't use it. He hasn't finished the idea, but in a small world story, the director Jeff Hetrick of that Altic Pride Marine Institute happened to be our Airbnb host. So the next morning we went and had breakfast with him, and he talked, he sang Michael's praises for being a talker and being great at the tours. But then when I mentioned Joe, he said, "Oh my God, this guy, he does these huge engineering projects, but then he's excited about kelp. He read about seeding to the line, and he thinks that's the solution. He's already starting to build it, and Jeff hasn't got him any funding yet. He said, 'You can get me your funding when you can. I'm going to build this thing.'" And again, he hasn't done it, but it was one of the most innovative things I heard on the trip. I mean, the work in Kodiak that they're doing is amazing, but it was really heartening to meet somebody who's just getting into this, and he's already has his own moonshot project that he's willing to fund himself and try and make it work. And as Brianna said, you can't see scaling in Alaska with spools of seed going out 200 feet at a time. So direct seeding is maybe happening sooner than later. I know. And she also knew Lexi Meyer, Alf's wife, is working on some of the genomics of it and the trying to cultivate for that. Also, one of the guys from BC, Tom, is opening his own hatchery. He was really interesting. He's been creating a slurry and painting the kelp seed onto his spools. So I've connected those guys. So because I think, that's part of the communication between the farmers is key. So if we can connect the dots, that's what we'll do. So then we went on to Homer, which was down at the very end of the Kenai Peninsula, where we were hosted by Lindsay and Leah Olson, owners of Spinnaker Sea Farms. Kristen visited the Kachemak Mariculture Center. We checked out the Kachemak Seaweeds Drying House, saw some of Maine's own Ocean's Balance at the Salmon Sisters store, and we took a cruise to Halibut Cove, and then we saw moose. Actually, the moose we saw before we took the cruise, but that was after dinner at Lindsay's, and they'd spent the dinner telling us about a bear in their yard. And we were wondering as we were leaving if we were going to see a bear, but no, we ran into a moose at the end of their driveway. So that was kind of cool. So I was curious, we got to the Kachemak Kelp, sorry, in the slide on the upper left, that's their drying house, very similar to what we've been drying some kelp in here. And we just missed that too. They had just emptied the drying house a few days earlier, and they were on the other side of the bay, so we didn't get to talk to anybody up front. But the research I did on Saltwater Inc., they, along with another company, Regeneration North, have established the Kachemak Kelp Processing Hub in Homer. It is a proof of concept applied research project designed to reduce barriers to getting locally produced farmed kelp to market. Lindsay tells us they've been buying her kelp for the past 2 years. So she has a local buyer, which makes it really easy for her to try and scale a little bit. And I found this interesting quote from the president of Saltwater Inc. "Someone once asked me, 'What gives you hope?' When I think about the health of our oceans and fisheries, one of my answers today is seaweed." And while we know it may not solve everything, if it gives us hope, that's a good thing. So on our trip across the bay, we came across what my friend ran into an old friend in Homer who took us out on a skiff. And we thought it was just an oyster farm. But if you look, if you zoom in, if you can zoom in, it says oysters, kelp, and mussels on this little farm stand boat. And I vote this the coolest farm stand in America. This is run by an outfit called Alaskan Shellfish Farm. And it's a couple, and I'm pretty sure they know Dana. They used to grow oysters on the St. George back here. And I think they've been in Alaska for the last 20 years and have built a pretty substantial oyster farm. And they may be one of the only mussel farms in the state of Alaska. But what was interesting to find out when they're the ones who reached out to UMI, I believe, at the MAIC at NACE, because they saw the picture on the flyer. And I've tried to contact them, but obviously they're busy. I said, if you can't get back to me now, we'll try and connect later. They're harvesting kelp, but it's all wild grown on their gear. And so they're drying it and creating products. And they just partnered with a company called Daybreak, and they're selling packaged product, and it's as close to wild kelp as you can get. I mean, it is wild, right? It's volunteers, as they say in the gardening circles. They show up, and so they're harvesting that, which I thought was pretty radical. So at the end of the day, what did we take away from our trip? Aquaculture is alive and growing well in Alaska. They have lots of funding for aquaculture. There's huge grants out there. The First Nations people, unlike the lower 48, they have a lot more clout. There's a lot more work on preserving their way of life and money going toward that. A lot of the work that the Altic Pride Marine Center does. There's a group called Native Conservancy that's doing good work and trying to keep this, the wild harvested, whether it's shellfish or hunter gatherers. I mean, that's I think all over Alaska, and there's a lot of funding to kind of like those Connex containers are being shipped out. The Mothers of Millions, that project, Brianna helped build that second container that's now, I guess, maybe the fifth commercial hatchery. I'm not sure it's commercial if it's going to tribal lands, but it's being used for the community. And now they're talking about another one to be shipping down the coast to another community in the mid coast, as they would say, down in Alaska. So they're replicating these things. It's happening, and it's happening pretty quickly from what I can tell. Nick Mangini, I think, had the first kelp farm, and I think that was only in 2016. So there's been pretty good growth in the past 8 years. So again, we talked about farmers need to set the standards, whether it's quality, safety, or policy. Farmers need a seat at the table. And how do we get that seat at the table? That's a big question. We need advocacy. Yes, we have advocates both in the science sector and organizations like on our end. We have Maine Aquaculture Association, the guy who runs the Altic Pride, Jeff. He is like the Sebastian Bell of Alaska. He's in it everything. He's going to DC. He's going to the state legislature. But he's also out there digging up clams, and they're doing a lot with testing for biotoxins and algae blooms, which from more research that I did about what they're doing, there's a lot more algae blooms in Alaska than almost anywhere else in the country, which is not a good thing to hear, but they're working on monitoring it. And the place in Seward was one of the, that's the center of it. So it was really, really amazing that I think we did the right thing by going to Kodiak to that and get to talk to 15, 20 people. And then our trip to Seward was fruitful, and Homer as well. But again, getting back to our takeaways, farmers can control more of the value chain by working together. I'm not saying that what our processors are doing is wrong, but I think there's another way. There's right now an opportunity to do some things differently. There's going to be the old ways of doing things, and that's great. But then there's newer ways of doing things that, like a lot of what I've learned doing aquaculture, we don't know it till we try it. And we have to at least try. We'll probably fail, but we're going to keep trying. There was a big talk, and I think this is really important. The national organic certification is needed. We talked about that. Like we have MOFGA, and they do a great job, but is it really? There's questions about that. If we could have a national certification process that covers the whole country, that would probably be better for us getting the best dollar for our kelp, because the water's constantly changing. We all know that. How can it, if we do the monitoring ourselves, or if we demand that our processors help, our buyers help us fund this, then we can kind of control the narrative and say, look, this water is clean. If there is a problem, we won't harvest. We will wait till the water's cleaner, because the water will wash the kelp. As if there's something in, whether this is going to work or not, it's just something that all the farmers I talk to believe is a good idea. So I think lastly, communication between all stakeholders can be generated by us, the farmer, and it's essential. I think that would be the biggest takeaway, that social license to operate is, it's constantly educating our public, our buyers, what our needs are, why we're doing it the way we're doing it, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And I strongly believe that. I mean, I went out there not wanting to talk, and now I can't stop talking about it. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, David. That was super interesting. We have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one, here, let me get my video going. The first one is about how many species of kelp are grown out there.
Oh, good question. I didn't have that in my notes, but they are growing 3 species. I don't have the Latin names. I'll tell you, they call it ribbon kelp, which is Alaria, sugar kelp, bull kelp, but they're also, I saw dragon kelp, which was in one of the pictures. And those are the ones that they're cultivating, but there's probably some others that they may try to cultivate that I don't have a handle on the names of those, but 3 main species.
Great, thanks.
And so our next question, what is the bottleneck on processing that most farmers are running into? Is it greenhouse and drying space, or time, or something else?
How to do it properly. I mean, if you're that's what that project in Homer's about. They're like, we've been doing stuff on the small scale, our co-op, and what's difficult, I think, is time. Like, you're working, you get the product in, and that's what I found interesting with this saltwater project, the Catary kelp processing, and I'm going to reach out to them to find more. They're taking, that saltwater ink is a marine company that does monitoring and data processing, both for NOAA, for fisheries, like fish monitoring. But putting those types of people to work on a project like this, we're going to have a better sense of how many man hours does it take to dry X number of pounds of kelp in a day, because they're hanging it all by hand. So there has to be a faster way, I know. And we talked with Dave Labby at Ocean's Balance, who just put this big dryer in Brunswick, Maine. And it's going to be interesting how that works out. And all I can think is, and I'm glad it's here in Maine, don't get me wrong, but why didn't they put that in Alaska? That's the biggest problem the Alaskans have. Like, we look at them, oh, you can grow so much kelp, and they look at us like, you have 150 million people within a 2 days drive of you. We have to ship everything from Alaska, and it's cost prohibitive. The processing is the bottleneck. And that's why I think an opportunity for farmers to collectively do more of that themselves, at least the first step, just to secure. And there, and Chris and Annie know more than I about there's stabilization processes trying to be developed so that people can keep kelp viable longer. We did talk a lot about that, but again, the science, that's a science question, I think.
All right,
Thanks,
I think
David.
we have one more question, or time for one more question. We have one question about eating seaweed. So do you want to talk a little bit about how we're eating seaweed in the US?
How we're eating seaweed? It's an ingredient more than as they say, more than a center of the plate item, but there's so many ways you can use it. I mean, the kelp burgers, I've tried all the kelp burgers. They're great. I know the guys, Sequester Sea Farm, that's one of the products they're developing. I personally, I use it. I call it my secret ingredient. I put it in all my pasta sauce. I put it on fish, obviously. I add it to soups. I have, kelp flakes or kelp powders. We make a shaky with we've been freeze drying it, which is working well. Because it just has a different texture and it breaks up really well. When it's, I have a thing about turning it into the next fiddlehead or ramp. Like, so we're going to be doing some fresh direct during pre-harvest season, as soon as it's viable that we can cut and deliver to restaurants or try and get it in a couple of farm markets. But fresh kelp is really great I love cooking it, eating it, making salads out of it, wrapping fish in it and poaching fish in it. Those are just some ideas. There's a lot of recipes out there if you start picking around on the internet.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you so much, David. That was a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot.
A little rough in the middle there, but
it was
there's
really
just
good.
so much information.
Yeah.
I hope I wasn't rambling too much, but
No, it was great. It was really good. And thanks to all of our participants for coming. We really appreciate your attendance. For anybody who, someone who wanted to see it but wasn't able to make it, let them know that it will be on YouTube, and we'll post it to the MAIC social media accounts sometime next week. And just a reminder again that our next webinar will be on February 16th, which is a Friday. At the
can
same
I just
time.
say one more thing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it, David, for sure.
The last page of my slideshow, can you still see that, or did you shut me down?
No, sorry, I stopped the screen sharing, but you can reshare if you want to.
Yeah. If I can do that, I'll just read it out. I just wanted to thank you to MAIC for this amazing opportunity. Also, thank you to Greenwave, especially Sam Garwin, who put together with Lindsay Olson and Grace Collery, put together the whole farmer forum. Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Center for hosting us there, and Alaska Sea Grant. Travis Forges of Organic Valley for his talk on co-ops. Andrew Crow from the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development. Jeff Hetrick, APMI Director. Michael Mahmood, APMI Production Manager. And all the farmers who we met on this odyssey. They all share their experiences, both failures and successes, and continue to try despite it all. I'd also like to thank all those who helped us and provided services along the way. And I'm proud to be part of this curious, innovative, hardworking, fun-loving community. And I'm hopeful that we truly can make a difference.
I clap to that. That's a great ending. No more words. Thank you everyone for coming.